You're listening to a podcast of The Mojo with Steph Renee. Weekdays 10 a.m. till noon on 900 AM WURD.com.
Hey, we're back. And that was the instrumental version of Straight Jackin' from the classic BEBE'S Kids. And the reason we played that, because we have a very special guest on the line. BEBE'S Kids is one of the hardest to get DVDs in the world, selling for upwards of $50 for years, has just been re-released by the Warner Archive. And with us on the line is Bruce W. Smith, the director of that classic film, 1992, to just share with us some memories about making that film. Hey, Bruce, thanks for joining us.
Okay.
Hey, how have you been? You're calling from L.A., right?
I'm calling from L.A. It's nice, crisp morning out here.
Wow. Now, I have to kick myself. We interviewed you for Reelblack TV when you came to Philly to do Princess and the Frog. And at the time, I had no idea that you were responsible for BEBE'S Kids. I would have asked you like 20 questions about the making of that movie. That's one of my favorite movies of all time, I swear to you.
Oh, man, thanks, man. That's great to hear. Especially considering, the climate and the time and everything that was out. It's first of its kind in sort of many categories, I guess, right?
Well, I guess first feature-length black cast animated feature. You had Coonskin before that, but that was sort of not a family film. There were a lot
yeah. This was sort of like that film that kind of came at the sort of the height of the classic hip hop era, also.
Mm-hmm. And the Hudlin brothers at the peak of their powers.
Hudlins were really heavily instrumental in really making that happen. I remember when they first came to the studio, I was at the studio Hyperion, and we had just finished this movie called Rover Dangerfield. And the guys were looking to do... Initially, the project was supposed to be live action.
Oh.
And unfortunately, when Robin Harris passed, Reggie was really prepping it in that direction, but they felt like this could be a cool, homage to Robin Harris, who was, if you know anything about Robin Harris, he was just this up-and-coming, he was going to be big, in terms of the comedy scene, and this kind of predated Def Jam comedy and all of that,
Test tube, baby.
Yeah, he was sort of, he was hosting he had his own joint down here in Los Angeles called the Comedy Act Theater.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of comedians would come down and see him, just be in the audience and watch him go, and it was just unfortunate. When, obviously when the Hudlins cast him in House Party, which was sort of like that real breakout role, for him, everybody's seeing him for the first time, and a lot of excitement was swirling around his career. I think Spike Lee then cast him in
Do the Right Thing, yeah.
Do the Right Thing, and he was just about to blow up, man. I think one of his last roles was Harlem Nights, I think, actually.
Wow. Well, did you know at the time you were making it was going to become such a beloved classic?
What's funny is that, I knew of Robin Harris because I'm from L.A., but nobody else in the studio really knew who he was. Listen, just even backtrack a little bit, animation, to get that film made alone was a monumental task because, in our business of animation, man, it's like made up of maybe, I'm being generous by saying 3 to 5% African Americans, even at that time. So it's rare that you'd get an African American in your film in terms of an actual character. When you think about any Disney film or anything that preceded anything being produced in 1990, there were no African American characters on the screen, let alone to be able to carry an entire film. So I just remember, when Reggie and those guys came through the studio, they met me. I think I was the only black guy they probably met in the studio, and still, have some form of connection to the material. Because I was born and raised in South Central. So,
and you were pretty young back then.
And I was like, I'm not even 30 yet, I think, when they came to me with that project. And no real... I guess, I went to Cal Arts in Valencia, and Cal Arts is sort of like the mecca of animation. So, I learned from the greats. I learned from all the guys who sort of went through and made films at Disney, from Snow White to, all the way up through. And these guys were old. Mm-hmm. all the way up through like the early 60s and early 70s. Plus, we used to have all these guys come down and give us lectures. If you know anything about Frank and Ollie,
right?
They're sort of like the parts of the legends, the Disney legends at the studio. All these guys have connections directly to Walt Disney. So these guys would come down on the regular and talk to us, teach us, go over our scenes, our shots, teach us the sort of Disney style of animation.
Mm-hmm.
And I have always been in animation as a kid. So, and I used to always draw black characters. I remember growing up. So when Reggie and those guys brought this project to the studio, man, I was excited because I knew that I would never get a chance to draw or create any African American characters with an African American template ever. It was like I felt like this is the first and last time to do something like this, I'm sure.
Right.
So, man, I jumped at it. And, Reggie and I, and Warrington, we had a nice rapport. And at that time, they were doing Boomerang, but Reggie was heavy and, he wrote the script, and they were producing. And I'm walking them through the process of what it takes to make an animated film also. But Reggie was well-versed in animation anyway. He's a huge comic book fan. He just had great knowledge to drop in terms of, what he was after, the tone and everything like that. And man, it was fun.
Was this a fully animated film, or was it limited animation?
Initially, it was supposed to be. We were setting it up as a TV series.
Okay.
And what happened was, Brandon Tartikoff was running the studio at the time, and we had done all this development work. Meaning all this artwork, and so. Or was it? I think it was it was a TV movie we were making, and Brandon decided to blow it up into a feature film just based on where it was, and I guess his knowledge of Robin Harris and just the spirit of the whole thing just kind of blew into a feature film. We did it on a real small budget, so it was a combination of sort of I guess you would say limited animation at the time, because I was a fan of the Flintstones, and knowing that what we were working with financially, I knew that the model it couldn't support what you would normally see in a Disney film. So I had to design these characters to make sure that they could sort of fit in a world that would be easily produced on the budget that we had.
Right. Now, going beyond BEBE'S Kids, you've worked on Proud Family and, like I said before, Princess and the Frog. What's it like? I don't know if we got into this when we were doing the interview before, but have things changed? What are the opportunities like for the next generation of black animators?
Well, the good thing is that nowadays with social media and everything like that, I see a lot of artists of color, because they either have their own blogs and Tumblrs, various websites, but animation is sort of a tricky medium. Even though you have all these artists, really incredible artists, it's hard to sort of find this lane of animation because it requires a very specific skill set. I see some really great illustrators, mm-hmm. but actual animation, being an animator, is a whole different thing. It's really the art of sort of breathing life into, a character. So there's various categories in making an animated film. Most artists nowadays gravitate towards the visual development side. So you really see, really great illustrated worlds that guys can create and certain characters that they can actually create. But an animator is like an actor. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So I rarely see African American artists getting into the bones of acting with their characters, and now the medium has changed so much to where it's now when you see a lot of these CG films, these are all sort of digital puppets, so there's no longer any real drawing required to be an actor in animation for the I would say for the mainstream type of media, which is CG. There's different forms of animation. There's flash animation, there's the TV animation that you see on TV, which is sort of limited in that sense. So you're talking about shows like The Simpsons and Family Guy and stuff like that. When we did The Proud Family, we had to follow that type of template. The only thing that bugged me about TV was that when you look at all the TV shows, and they had this sense of ugly to them. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I grew up loving the Flintstones and the Jetsons and all of this stuff, and I said, how come no one can produce a film that actually has a good-looking quality to it. You know what I mean? I mean, instead of characters with bulbous eyes or bulbous heads or just that weirdness that we don't necessarily know, let me create some characters that I feel like fits at least my, design sensibilities, and yet and still, bring as much, African American pride as I can to the project, and that's sort of how the Proud Family was born. And I always wanted to, when you get into different shows, you see a black character in the show, and he's going to bleed stereotype. You know what I mean? No matter what you do, because you only got that one character that you're working with.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? So you don't get the full spectrum of what African American people are in one character. So that was my thing, to sort of create an entire world where we can get the crazy people that but also get some more grounded people that makes this world real. So for me, it was really about creating balance in this universe, because I wanted to be just as crazy as the next guy and creating.
Yeah, how did that come about? Like, you were the creator of and writer on the Proud Family. I mean, how did that come? Was that a result of BEBE'S KIDS or just being in the industry?
Absolutely. I think BEBE'S KIDS was certainly the stepping off point of creating and having the license to create anything African American that would be legit from an African American artist. So because I still know a lot of artists today, where black dudes, man, and even women too, who, when pen goes to paper, or if they're at a major studio, they're not developing black characters. You know what I'm saying? So, you can look at certain movies and say, wow, that character didn't have to be white. If you look at like movies like Monsters, Inc., would it have been any different if Boo was a little black girl? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But I think it takes an African American artist or an artist who has maybe an open palette in terms of trying to service different characters that we hadn't seen in movies before, to be able to have just the willingness to sort of do that and paint that. Even when you look at a movie like Princess and the Frog, where the main cast was mainly African American, done by the Disney studios, but the very next film was Tangled. And there was no black people in that world. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's like, what is that about? It's an imaginary world.
And I got a bone to pick. Finally we get a black Disney princess, but then they're frogs for like half the movie. So
yeah, right.
I'm still a little upset about that. But we got that.
When you think about that, I actually got that before when we were touring with the film, and it wouldn't have mattered even if the cast was Asian. You still would have had them be frogs throughout the whole film, because the story is based on an old, fairy tale where the characters are frogs. Well,
that's tricknology there, Bruce Smith. Why couldn't they be from Egypt or something?
Hilarious, right? Well, listen, I get hit online all the time, or emails where people have projects that, hey, I've got this great idea for an African fairy tale or an Egyptian fairy tale. Here's the thing with that. That's all fine, and I don't mind doing that stuff at all. But the truth of it is, when you think about the landscape of show business, and how many African films that that actually sort of are box office champs, how many Egyptian films led by black people that are actually box office champs, because this is the business that we're in. It's show business. We can come up with great ideas for these films, but we have to ask who's going to go see them. Who's going to go support them. Right. And so when I always put pencil to paper, I always ask myself that question, like, who's going to support this idea? How can you take a mainstream idea and really flip it on its head? Because the truth of it is, like, when you think of a lot of African American movies that are being made that are based on anything that's not current, that deals with our past, it normally deals with an oppressive subject matter. You know what I mean? It's like, here we are in the 60s. We know what the 60s was to black folks. You know what I mean? Here we are in the 30s. We know what the 30s was to black folks. So if we're being honest in terms of storytelling, it's hard to get out of that oppressive era and tell an uplifting story, because live action has a hard time doing it. So can you imagine in animation, again, where there's no groundswell of African-American artists that are bringing ideas to the table, how can they get ideas that are uplifting, that they feel like there's going to be a majority of audience that's going to go see this film the same way an audience would go see Finding Nemo?
Exactly. Well, we're up against the break. I mean, can you stay a little longer? Or
Oh yeah, man, sure.
Okay, well let's take a break. I have a little copy to read, and then we'll come back with Bruce W. Smith.
Hip hop with a little bit of mania.
Okay, that was MC Breeze's latest. What, you just sit in your lab and come up with this stuff,
dude? Man, I just wake up in the morning. I just wake up in the morning and just create, man.
Okay.
Whatever I want to flow with. That was that day.
With us on the line, joining us back again is Bruce W. Smith, who's director, animator, who's responsible for some of the classics, things that have really inspired our kids, like BEBE'S Kids, The Proud Family, was an animator on Princess and the Frog, and did a lot of the Happily Ever Afters. And we were talking about, the types of images that we're feeding our children, I suppose, in this form of entertainment. What? And Breeze, you're an animator as well.
Yes.
You've done some kids entertainment. I mean, do you have
thumbsuckingweedy.com, that's online. I have a cartoon we're working on called The Hood Rats as well. It's kind of an adult type comedy thing, sort of like the Boondocks, except with the exception of it's done right here in Philly opposed to in Korea. And
okay.
thehoodrats.com, it's interesting when you talked about the animation process, because I'm working in 3D animation and the tools are so good that when I look at what I've animated, it doesn't have the character. So now I'm like, instead of using lip sync in the way that you use it as a 3D animator, now I'm taking my mouse and guy's mouth open when he speaks, opposed to having perfect lip sync. And it's actually better to not be as precise. Even the body movements, instead of using just all mocap, I'm actually adding some extra stuff, because I'm like, wait a minute, these characters are cartoony in a sense, but it's too good. It's almost, so now I'm kind of like messing it up on purpose, so that it's actually funny and it brings the attention in. But and it's the same thing. The Hood Rats is another difference, because a lot of people say, to compare, the Boondocks, and it's like, no, not really, because the Boondocks is black kids in suburbia, where the Hood Rats are right in their environment, and it does have to have that element of being entertainment, as well as, if you want to put, I think every animator or storyteller has an agenda. But you have to understand that people have an attention span that you have to a palate they have to feed. It's been fed for years. You have to kind of do both, and a lot of people don't get that. But so it was interesting that you said that about the animation having character.
Animation, for me, it's like the attraction for me for animation is like it's I always call it like it's the ultimate magic trick, really, to be able to create, this illusion of life, really. It's an exaggeration, it's a caricature of everything that we see, but believe it. You actually, when you think about all the films that you've seen, the best films that you've seen, when you think about, one of my favorite movies, like, for example, is The Incredibles. When you think about those characters in that movie, they don't exist. There's nothing on that screen that you're looking at that's real. There's voices that are coming out of these creations from really great animators, from these really, the designs are really great. So you believe that Mr. Incredible has the strength that he has with these little pin-like legs.
What's cool from that movie? That line of when he says, "If everybody's a superhero, then nobody will be."
Right. Yeah.
That's my favorite line of that entire film, because it's almost like what's going on now.
Right. It's so true with that. I mean, even when you think about, I crack up off of, like, one of the TV shows that I got hooked on that completely disappointed me was Heroes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mainly because I thought it was interesting, because you had this select amount of people that were sort of, had these superpowers and didn't necessarily know how to exist in a modern day society. But then you come to find out everybody's super in this world. It's like, then that phrase applied. When everybody's super, nobody is.
It takes away.
So then the world kind of became kind of unbelievable to me. And that's the most important thing in animation, is creating these characters in a believable world. You have to believe that this world actually exists because the people that's in it. What The Simpsons has done that's really great is that they've crafted a believable world. When you think about how that whole thing is kind of spawned out, based on where it came from. It came from that little Tracy Ullman show, you know, in the 80s, and it was just about this little, you know, crazy family with this weird family dynamic, and then all of a sudden now you open this world up entirely, so anybody they introduce in this world, you believe. You know, it's just this really alternative universe, and when animation works best, it's the characters that are in this crazy but yet believable, you know, imaginary world. I mean, that's, to me, when I go back to The Incredibles, it's like, what's cool about that is that what Brad Bird did with that movie, that and it's the toughest thing ever to do, because when you think about, you know, the Marvel universe, you know, or the DC universe, for example, you know, they crafted that universe for years to make, you know, all these characters kind of exist in this world, and you have them believe that they can actually exist in this sort of quasi, you know, Gotham, New York City type of environment. The Incredibles did that same thing, created this world based on nothing, no comic books, no nothing to follow it with. But you believe that world, you know, you believe those characters in that world. And what's great about that, again, it goes back to what I was talking about. I was like, you know, listen, they dropped Frozone into that world. I'll forever be grateful to Brad Bird for doing that, because, you know,
Sam Jackson.
It's like, that is fantastic. You've got a black superhero in this world that, you know, you don't necessarily, you know, go into it completely. But he's a main character in that world. You could make a whole movie off of this character, Frozone, and I'd be totally there.
Right.
You know?
Well, Bruce, we've got a call on the line. Cliff from Yaden checking in. Hey, Brother Brock.
Yes, indeed. Hello, Hotep. Good afternoon. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey.
Good to hear your voices. Reelblack, always on top. I'm looking forward to this coming Saturday show. And the question, comment that I have for the guest, I guess it's twofold. When Hollywood uses children in film, movies, not necessarily animation, but because I don't really go to animation movies, but what I see is the movie can be rated R, but Hollywood will still put a child in as a starring role. I guess they feel as though anytime children are in a movie, people will come out to see it. So when you mention you make movies, that you have to make sure that people are going to come out and watch it. I'm really upset when Hollywood puts children in R-rated movies, because now, going back to your other comment, how that brings down, or how that, you know, gives a negative view of how children act. And technically, children shouldn't even be seeing this stuff in the household, or out on the street, when it's R-rated, X-rated. So, A, what is your view on children playing? And then on the animation part, is it the same two-tier answer where if it's a cultural animated film, it has to be a box office smash, but when it's a Caucasian film, they have the luxury of bombing out at the box office and it's still big success? I mean, not a success. They still allow them to make another one even though it was a dud?
I'll answer your last question first. So I think...
Okay, thank you, Brother Brock.
You know, animation is an interesting medium, because I always see it as kind of like the stepchild of entertainment, if you will, because it doesn't necessarily get the respect of, in my opinion, of filmmaking as a whole. And I'll give you an example. You know, you got movies. I mentioned, you know, movies like Incredibles. Take any Pixar movie. Take those Pixar directors. Take anything that Disney's done, Frozen, you know, which is one of the biggest box office films of all time. Take those directors from that film, from an animated film that you know, makes money for the studio, comes out, you know, you think about Disney. Disney comes to bat once a year on the animation side, and they will make something that will knock it out the park, right? Mm-hmm. But you got a studio like Warner Brothers who has 15, 16 films that comes out a year. And probably 13 of those will be bombs, 14 possibly, right? And you've got maybe one or two movies that are hits. But let's just take those 15. They probably didn't have, you know, any African Americans in them or anything, but they're all sort of, you know, they're all probably made by white directors, and they'll bomb. Now, do you think if a black studio released, 14, 15 movies a year, and 14 of them bomb, you think we'd actually get another chance? You think that studio would still be around? Yeah, that's just how Hollywood is.
Exactly. You know? But I mean, what would have taken for there to be in a BEBE'S Kids 2? Or
box office. When the movie came out, we were only released in like maybe 600 theaters or something like that, right?
Okay.
But if you go and look at the box office return of those theaters, we were number 2 that weekend. So the translation would be, if you put us in 2,000 theaters, we probably would have been number 1 that weekend. You know what I mean? In terms of the people who actually went to go see the movie. There's not a whole lot of theaters that are showing it, but those theaters are selling out, in various urban areas or whatever. I remember it was second to, I think a Robert Zemeckis movie. I forget what the movie was, but it's Robert Zemeckis.
Yeah, it's tough to beat that.
You know what I mean? It's like, so the movie didn't get a wider release to sort of garner the opportunity to make real money at the box office.
Right.
So yeah, there could have been the concept of doing a BEBE'S Kids 2, or even a BEBE'S Kids TV series.
Right.
Which I think would have been fun to do. The actors were really fantastic actors. They're still around today. That film birthed a lot of careers. Faison Love played Robin Harris in that movie. People think that Robin Harris actually was in that movie.
Right. Was Faison doing the voice? Yeah.
Faison, Big Worm from Friday. You know what I mean? So,
exactly.
the opportunities that it gave African Americans was fantastic. Myself included. So, I think if you're talking about mainstream movies, listen, it's just how Hollywood is built.
Well, it's definitely a classic. We've got to take our next break, but Bruce, I really appreciate you taking the time to spend 2 segments with us. And when I get out to LA, I want to sit down with you so we can do like a behind the scenes on BEBE'S Kids, just so people know it's criminal that BEBE'S Kids will be out of print for so long on DVD, but now it's finally out, and we finally have. But there was no director's commentary, so we got to fix that.
Oh, I got a question. Was Tone Loc? Come on, man.
Tone Loc was Tone Loc.
Okay, all right, man. You almost messed me up with the Faison thing, man.
Oh no, man. Tone Loc. I remember when Reggie.
That's my dog, man.
And
okay.
Reggie knew right away you wanted to cast Tone Loc. We just knew that character had to have that bend to it.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Bruce, for taking the time.
Man. Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for the opportunity to talk. It's fun.
All right, absolutely. Thank you, and we'll be right back with more Mojo.
You've been listening to a podcast of The Mojo with Steph Renee. Weekdays, 10 a.m. till noon. Follow us on your favorite social media like Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for up-to-the-minute information at 900 AM WURD.